When you walk away and truly remove yourself, most people misunderstand what's actually happening. They assume absence is passive, that nothing is being done, that you're simply waiting or hoping. But absence is not empty space. Absence is pressure. It is psychological weight that presses harder with every passing day. When you disappear without drama, without explanations, without chasing or justifying yourself, you trigger something far deeper than anger or sadness. You trigger uncertainty, and uncertainty is where emotional collapse begins. At first, she may feel relief. This is the phase most men panic during. She might seem calm, detached, even happy. She may post more, go out more, laugh louder. On the surface, it looks like she's unaffected, but this is not strength, it's emotional anesthesia. The mind protects itself from loss by numbing the pain temporarily. During this stage, she tells herself stories. She convinces herself she made the right choice. She repeats narratives that justify the separation. She leans on validation from others to drown out the silence you left behind. But silence has a way of seeping in anyway. Your absence removes a constant emotional anchor from her life. When you were present, you provided stimulation, certainty, attention, and emotional grounding even during conflict. Once that's gone, the nervous system doesn't relax, it destabilizes. Humans are wired to notice sudden emotional withdrawals more intensely than overt rejection. When something meaningful disappears without explanation, the brain works overtime trying to make sense of it. And the longer you remain absent, the more her mind fills the void with questions she cannot answer. This is where time becomes your ally, not because time heals her, but because time exposes what distraction hides. The first few days are filled with noise, friends, social media, new conversations, surface-level excitement. But noise fades, and when it does, the mind returns to what was lost. She begins replaying moments. Not the fights, not the arguments, but the emotional peaks, the laughter, the safety, the feeling of being desired. The version of herself she was when she was with you. Absence doesn't erase memories, it sharpens them. What makes this so powerful is that you are not present to interrupt the narrative. You're not defending yourself. You're not explaining your side, you're not chasing closure. Without your input, her mind becomes both the prosecutor and the judge. And slowly, without resistance, the story starts to shift. Doubt replaces certainty. Curiosity replaces confidence. She begins to wonder why you didn't come back, why you didn't fight harder, why you didn't beg, why you didn't try to convince her. And this is where the pressure intensifies. Silence communicates something words never can: self-respect. When you stay away, you are unconsciously telling her that your life continues without her validation, that you are not defined by her approval, that you are capable of loss without self-destruction. This contradicts the emotional script she expected. Most people expect resistance when they pull away. They expect pursuit, explanations, emotional reactions. When that doesn't happen, it creates a psychological imbalance. She starts questioning her own value instead of yours. As time stretches on, the absence becomes heavier. Days turn into weeks, weeks into silence, and the human mind hates unresolved emotional loops. She may try to distract herself with attention from others, but comparison becomes inevitable. New conversations feel hollow. Compliments feel cheap. Laughter feels forced. No one triggers her emotions the way you did, because emotional chemistry isn't replaceable, it's built. And now that build is gone, the longer you stay away, the more obvious that becomes. This is where regret quietly enters. Not dramatic regret, not tears at first, subtle regret, the kind that shows up late at night, the kind that whispers, maybe I misjudged him, the kind that replays moments she once dismissed. Time strips away emotional bias. Without your presence to absorb blame, she is left alone with her choices. And choices feel heavier when there is no one left to react against. Absence also removes your predictability. When you were present, she knew how you'd respond. She knew your patterns. She knew your emotional availability. Now she knows nothing, and uncertainty is unsettling. She starts imagining possibilities. Maybe you've moved on. Maybe you've grown. Maybe someone else sees your value now. These imagined scenarios sting far more than reality ever could. The longer you remain silent, the more vivid these scenarios become in her mind. And here's the most important part: you are not doing this to punish her. You're doing this to reclaim your center. Your absence is not manipulation. It's alignment. You're choosing dignity over desperation. Strength over emotional bargaining. You're allowing time to do what words never could: reveal truth. And truth is uncomfortable. Truth dismantles illusions. Truth forces reflection. Over time, she begins to emotionally spiral, not outwardly, but internally. Confidence erodes, certainty fades, the image she had of herself as the one in control weakens. She starts checking for signs of you. A post, a story, any trace, when she finds none, the silence feels louder. That's when emotional pressure peaks. Not because you said something, but because you didn't. Your absence forces her to confront a reality she avoided, losing someone who did not lose himself. And that realization hits deeper than any argument ever could. Time magnifies everything: attraction. Regret curiosity, and when you stay away long enough, the emotional balance shifts entirely. You are no longer the one seeking clarity. She is, and by the time she feels the weight of it fully, the man she remembers is no longer standing in the same emotional place. He has moved on internally. He has grown quieter, stronger, less reactive, and that transformation, the one she senses but cannot see, is what breaks her illusions the most. Because absence didn't weaken you, it revealed your strength. At the beginning, it rarely looks like regret. That's the part that confuses most men and makes them doubt their own strength. When you first step away, she often appears lighter, freer, almost relieved. She may seem energized, social, busy, and emotionally unaffected. This phase can feel like proof that you never mattered as much as you thought. But what you're seeing is not clarity or confidence, it's emotional inflation. It's the rush that comes from perceived freedom and sudden attention. And like all inflated states, it cannot sustain itself. Validation is a powerful drug. When a relationship ends or emotional distance appears, attention from others spikes. Compliments come easily, messages increase. People step in to fill the gap you left behind. At first, this feels empowering to her. It reassures her ego. It supports the narrative that she made the right decision. She tells herself she's desirable, in control, moving forward. But this validation has no roots. It doesn't come from shared history, emotional investment, or deep connection. It's surface-level reassurance, and surface-level reassurance fades quickly. Time is what exposes the difference between real emotional value and temporary attention. The first few days are filled with novelty, new faces, new conversations, new energy, but novelty wears off. When it does, the emotional comparison begins. She starts noticing what's missing rather than what's present. The laughter feels thinner, conversations lack depth, emotional safety is absent. The people offering attention don't truly know her, and she feels that gap more with every interaction. What once felt exciting starts to feel empty. This is when the internal dialogue shifts. Instead of telling herself she's better off, she starts asking quieter questions. Why doesn't this feel the way she expected? Why do these compliments feel interchangeable? Why doesn't anyone make her feel the way you did? Time strips away the fantasy of replacement. Attraction can be sparked quickly, but emotional bonding cannot. And as days turn into weeks, the absence of that bond becomes impossible to ignore. Regret doesn't arrive loudly. It creeps in, it shows up during moments of stillness, late nights, early mornings, quiet drives, empty rooms. It appears when distractions end. She begins replaying moments she once minimized. She remembers how you showed up, how you understood her moods, how you grounded her emotionally, and because you're no longer there to contradict these memories, they grow stronger. Time reshapes the emotional narrative. What intensifies this regret is the realization that you didn't chase. You didn't fight for attention. You didn't beg to be seen. Your absence suggests something unsettling, that you knew your value and were willing to walk away from someone who couldn't see it. This challenges her internal hierarchy. Instead of viewing herself as the prize, she begins questioning whether she misjudged yours. And that shift is deeply destabilizing. As validation from others continues to fade, comparison becomes brutal. She starts measuring every interaction against the emotional standard you set, and no one quite matches it. Not because you were perfect, but because connection is built over time. Shared experiences, emotional vulnerability, trust. These cannot be replicated instantly. Time reveals this gap mercilessly. The longer you stay away, the clearer it becomes that what she lost was not easily replaceable. This is also where loneliness begins to surface, not the loneliness of being alone, but the loneliness of being surrounded by people who don't truly connect. Emotional loneliness cuts deeper than physical solitude. She may be busy, but she feels unseen. She may be admired, but she feels unknown. And in those moments, the memory of you becomes heavier, not idealized, but missed. Regret deepens when she realizes she cannot access you anymore. If you were still reacting, still watching, still available, the emotional safety net would remain intact. But your silence removes that comfort. She doesn't know where she stands with you. She doesn't know if she could come back. This uncertainty transforms regret into urgency. Time, which once felt abundant, now feels like it's working against her. Her ego resists this realization at first. She may try to suppress it. She may double down on independence, post happiness, seek more attention. But the emotional returns keep diminishing, validation becomes less satisfying, compliments lose their effect. What once boosted her confidence now barely registers, and this is when the truth becomes unavoidable. She underestimated the emotional value you brought into her life. Regret also carries fear, the fear that she made a permanent mistake. That fear grows with time. Every day you remain absent reinforces the idea that you are not waiting, that you are not stuck, that you are capable of moving forward, and this realization reframes the loss. It's no longer about missing you, it's about losing access to someone who genuinely added value to her life. As weeks pass, her emotional state becomes more unstable. She oscillates between confidence and doubt, empowerment and insecurity. One moment she tells herself she's fine. The next, she feels an inexplicable heaviness. Time amplifies these emotional swings. And because you are no longer present to absorb or regulate them, she feels them more intensely. Eventually, regret reaches a point where it demands resolution. She wants clarity. She wants reassurance. She wants to know if the door is still open. But the longer you've stayed away, the harder it becomes for her to reach out without confronting her own choices. Time doesn't just expose regret, it forces accountability, and accountability is uncomfortable. The most powerful part of this process is that you didn't cause it through pressure or persuasion. You didn't argue your worth. You didn't try to prove anything. You simply removed your presence and allowed time to reveal the truth. And that truth is that real emotional value cannot be replaced by attention, and real connection cannot be substituted with distraction. By the time regret fully settles in, it's no longer about missing what you did for her. It's about missing who she was when she was with you. And that realization hits hardest of all. The moment you stop reacting, everything changes. Most people don't realize how much power they give away through emotional responses. Explaining yourself, defending your intentions, seeking closure, or trying to be understood all signal the same thing: investment without boundaries. When you remove those reactions, you don't just create distance, you reverse the entire emotional dynamic. Detachment is not coldness, it is control over your inner world, and that control quietly shifts the balance of power. When you were emotionally engaged, she knew where you stood. She understood your patterns. She knew how to provoke a response, how to pull reassurance, how to trigger explanations. Even conflict gave her certainty. Even arguments confirmed your emotional availability. But when you detach, that certainty disappears. And certainty is comfort. Without it, the emotional ground beneath her begins to crack. Detachment creates unpredictability. And unpredictability is unsettling when someone was used to emotional access. She no longer knows what you're thinking. She no longer knows how you feel. She no longer knows if you miss her, resent her, or have moved on entirely. The mind does not like unanswered questions. It tries to fill the gaps, and when it does, it often imagines scenarios far worse than reality. What makes detachment so powerful is that it doesn't announce itself. You're not declaring independence. You're not making a statement. You're simply not emotionally available anymore. That absence of reaction forces her to look inward instead of outward. When there's no response to push against, no emotion to manage, no reassurance to extract, she's left alone with her own feelings. And those feelings intensify without regulation. Detachment also dismantles the illusion of control. When you were emotionally invested, she felt influential. She felt that her actions affected you. That influence reinforced her sense of power. But detachment removes that leverage. She can no longer measure her impact on you. And when someone loses the ability to influence another emotionally, insecurity replaces confidence. She begins questioning her significance rather than your behavior. Time magnifies this effect. At first, she may interpret your detachment as temporary. She may assume you'll come back emotionally, that you'll eventually reach out, explain, or react, but as days pass with no shift, a new realization forms. This isn't a tactic, it's a transformation. And transformation is threatening because it suggests permanence. Emotional detachment communicates self-worth without saying a word. It says you value your peace more than validation. It says you don't need external approval to feel whole. And that message challenges the emotional hierarchy she believed existed. Instead of seeing herself as the center of your emotional world, she now senses that you have a center of your own. That independence is deeply attractive and deeply destabilizing. As time continues, the emotional roles reverse. You are no longer the one seeking clarity. She is. You are no longer the one wondering where you stand. She is. You are no longer emotionally reactive. She becomes emotionally restless. This reversal doesn't happen overnight. It unfolds gradually, quietly, relentlessly, and because it's not forced, it feels more real. Detachment also prevents emotional closure. Closure usually comes from conversation, explanation, and emotional exchange. But when you detach, you remove that possibility. There is no final discussion to resolve feelings, no emotional bow to wrap things up. The story remains unfinished. And unfinished emotional stories linger, they replay, they haunt. Time does not close them, it deepens them. She may attempt to regain emotional access subtly, a message, a reaction, a reminder of shared memories. But detachment means you don't bite, you don't punish, you don't reward, you remain neutral. And neutrality is confusing when someone expects emotion. The lack of response feels louder than rejection ever could. As weeks pass, detachment reshapes how she remembers you. You are no longer associated with neediness or conflict. You become associated with strength, composure, and emotional maturity. Memory edits itself over time. The emotional noise fades. What remains is the image of a man who walked away without losing himself. That image grows more powerful the longer you maintain distance. Detachment also creates contrast. When she interacts with others who are emotionally reactive, needy, or performative, the contrast becomes stark. Your calm stands out in retrospect. Your silence feels heavy. Your absence feels intentional. And intentional absence feels like choice, not loss. That distinction matters. Being chosen away from hurts more than being rejected. Internally, this dynamic erodes her emotional stability, not because you are doing something to her, but because she is losing her emotional reference point. She doesn't know how to categorize you anymore. You're no longer the man who wanted her approval. You're no longer emotionally available on demand. You exist outside her emotional control, and that independence forces her to confront her own emotional dependency. Detachment also protects you. While time works on her emotions, it stabilizes yours. You stop replaying conversations. You stop seeking answers. You stop tying yourself worth to her reactions. Emotional distance creates clarity, and clarity creates growth. As you grow internally, the emotional gap widens. She feels the distance not just physically, but energetically. Eventually, detachment becomes irreversible. Even if she reaches out, the dynamic is no longer the same. You are grounded, you are centered, you are no longer negotiating your value, and she senses that. The power shift is complete not because she lost power, but because you reclaimed yours. This is the quiet truth most people miss. Emotional detachment doesn't push someone away. It pulls you back to yourself. And when you return to yourself fully, anyone who once relied on your emotional availability feels that loss deeply. Time doesn't weaken this effect. It strengthens it, because detachment, maintained long enough, becomes identity. And identity is the strongest signal of all. At some point, time stops being something she uses to distract herself and starts becoming something that confronts her. In the beginning, illusions are easy to maintain. Illusions about strength, about control, about having made the right decision. Illusions about you being replaceable, about the connection being ordinary, about the loss being temporary or insignificant. These illusions survive on noise, opinions of friends, surface-level validation, social activity, constant stimulation. But time has a way of stripping noise away, and when it does, illusions don't survive. They collapse under their own weight. When you don't return, when you don't reappear to soften the consequences of her choices, something critical happens inside her mind. The fantasy that she can always come back to you begins to dissolve. Many people don't fear loss itself. They fear permanence. As long as there's a belief that something can be recovered, the emotional cost feels manageable. But when time passes and you remain absent, permanence enters the picture. And permanence forces honesty. Without your presence, she can no longer project blame outward. She can no longer argue with you, reshape the narrative through conflict, or validate her decisions by provoking reactions. There is no emotional mirror anymore, so the mind turns inward. This is where self-deception becomes harder to maintain. She starts revisiting moments not to justify herself, but to understand what actually happened. And understanding is far more dangerous to illusions than emotion ever was. Time also removes emotional momentum. The rush she felt immediately after the separation fades. The sense of empowerment dulls. The adrenaline wears off, and what remains is stillness. In stillness, the mind asks different questions. Not was I right, but what did I lose? Not am I happier, but why does this feel emptier than I expected? These questions don't come all at once. They arrive slowly, quietly, persistently, and each one chips away at the story she told herself. When you don't come back, her mind is forced to reconcile two conflicting realities: the belief that she made the right choice and the growing emotional evidence that something valuable is missing. Cognitive dissonance sets in. To resolve it, one of those realities has to give, and over time, it's rarely the emotional truth that loses. The longer you stay away, the harder it becomes for her to defend the illusion that losing you was inconsequential. She begins to reevaluate her assumptions. She remembers things she once dismissed: your consistency, your emotional presence, your ability to ground her when she was overwhelmed. She notices how rare that actually was. Time reframes value. What felt ordinary when it was available starts to feel exceptional once it's gone. And because you are not there to interrupt this process, her mind completes it on its own. This is where illusions truly begin to break. Not dramatically, but decisively. She realizes that she didn't just lose a relationship, she lost access to your attention, your stability. Your emotional leadership and access is different from attachment. Attachment can be replaced. Access to a specific dynamic cannot. That realization changes how she sees the past. It also changes how she sees herself. Without you returning, she is forced to confront the part she played. Not in a self-blaming way at first, but in an honest one. She starts asking whether she valued you properly, whether she tested boundaries she shouldn't have, whether she assumed your presence instead of appreciating it. These questions are uncomfortable because they threaten the self-image she maintained. And when self-image is threatened, illusions crumble. Time also removes the illusion of leverage. Early on, she may have believed she held the upper hand, that you'd always be there, that you'd reach out eventually, that she could decide the terms whenever she wanted. But your continued absence disproves that belief. Power based on assumption disappears when assumptions fail. And when leverage is gone, humility enters the emotional equation. As days turn into weeks and weeks into months, the narrative simplifies. Complexity fades, justifications weaken. What remains is a clear emotional truth. Someone meaningful exited her life and did not come back. That clarity is painful because it cannot be argued with. There is no debate left, no emotional bargaining, just consequence. And here's where time does its most unforgiving work. It shows her that life moved forward without her, that you adapted, that the world didn't pause, that she was not the axis everything revolved around. This realization doesn't crush her ego all at once. It erodes it, slowly, relentlessly, until the illusion of irreplaceability is gone. When illusions break, longing often replaces confidence, not desperation, but a deep, quiet yearning. A wish to undo, a desire to reconnect with a version of life that felt more anchored. But by the time she reaches this point emotionally, The version of you she remembers no longer exists in the same way. Time didn't just change her perception, it changed you, because while time was dismantling her illusions, it was refining your identity. Your absence wasn't idle, it was transformative. You learned to sit with discomfort without reacting. You rebuilt your sense of self without external validation. You grew into emotional independence, and that growth creates an invisible boundary. Even if she reaches out, she feels it. This is the final break. The realization that she didn't just lose someone, she lost timing. She lost access to a man who existed in a moment that cannot be revisited. The door isn't slammed shut. It's simply no longer where it used to be, and that subtlety is what makes it hurt the most. Time doesn't punish. It reveals. It reveals what was taken for granted. It reveals what was misjudged. It reveals what cannot be recreated once it's gone. And when you don't return, you allow that revelation to fully form, not through words, not through confrontation, but through reality itself. In the end, what breaks her illusions isn't your silence alone. It's the consistency of it. The quiet proof that you respected yourself enough to walk away and stay away. That proof rewrites everything she believed about you, about herself, and about the choice she made. And once that rewrite is complete, there is no going back to the old story.